Hey, it's David and welcome back to Moto Mirius. Today we're doing a rear brake overhaul on the 650 Bandit and we're going to change the brake fluid. So let's get into it. Before we start, let's make sure the back of the bike is clean. So you've washed over where the breakers and stuff, got rid of all the brake dust, all of the dirt and everything else that's going to be thrown on it by the rear wheel. I'm taking off the slip-on so that you can see what I'm doing easier, but you can do this without doing it, but you won't see a thing if that muffler's in the way. First thing we need to do is to free off these cables. So just slide them out of the clip here, and that will allow you to manipulate the caliper. There are two bolts that hold the caliper on. These bolts bolt into the carrier here, and they are sliding pins. You can see they've got rubber boots on. You can't see on this one, but it has a rubber boot on the back, and this is so that the caliper can slide as the brakes actually touch the disc. So we've got a solid mount disc, a piston here, and a pad held in the back side of the caliper here. As you press the brakes, it pushes the piston out. This pad touches the disc. As it touches, it can't go any further. As you keep on pushing the piston out with the rear brake, the caliper slides across until this back pad touches as well, and then both are braking at the same time. Inevitably this pad here should always get more wear than this one. So this is the pin that holds the pads in. Now this one's nice and shiny because I've replaced it with a stainless steel or titanium pin because the originals do rust up. I would suggest that you change this pin at least every time you change the pads, or whenever you see it starting to go particularly rusty, because once it rusts up, everything becomes hard to get apart. This is a 12. And 14. Oh yeah, this one is really seized, which just goes to show why it's important to take brakes apart on a regular basis. It's a simple enough task, but if you leave it, it can become a problem. I'm upgrading to something with a bit more leverage. That is not a happy bolt. This bolt does not want to come out, and now I've got it out this far, I can see there's corrosion in there, so I'm having to apply some outward pressure because the bolt is just turning. There it goes. It was just turning in place without coming out. So now I've got that one out, I can remove this one and the whole thing will come free. However, before I take it off, I want to actually take this pin out so that I can take the pads out. So I'm just going to slip this bolt back in. Since we're doing a quick overhaul, it's worthwhile taking all of these pins out, just so we can re-grease them and so forth. And you can see just here the white corrosion coming out from around here, so definitely worthwhile pulling these out. I think I was a bit too close with the camera there. Alright, so yeah, still the white corrosion, but this is a decent pin, so I can reuse this. pads pretty good, no problem with those. But before I pull them out, I'm just going to rotate the piston a bit, get that driven in a little bit, just so I've got a bit of free room. Right. This one more worn than the other one, which is what I said. This pad is what takes the brunt of the wear. In actual fact, that's getting pretty close down to minimum. So I'm going to order a new set of pads and get these changed over. That needs to come back out more often and be cleaned up. Best solution would be to buy a new one of these if you can get hold of it, because the plating is all gone off the bolt, and short of replating it, if you have a kit, that's just going to rust again. But now this is free to come out. We can give this a quick clean up and move on. We need to pump the piston back out to clean around that as part of our process. So let's get on with this. This is pretty dirty too. This end tab has to sit on this ledge here, so this is the one that sits behind it. When you rotate that up, it drops off the ledge, and then you can't get the caliper back down. But if you just lift them up onto the ledge there, you can put the pad back in. So when I come to change these pads shortly, and you can see this one is almost brand new, it's hardly had any wear on it at all. All I'm going to do is take this pin out, rotate it up, sort the pads, put it back together. So I've got that bolt out, I've stuck it on the wire wheel, I've cleaned it up, but there's rust pitting, the plating's gone, it really will need to be replaced. Now interestingly, with this design of caliper, normally you can leave this bolt in, because this bolt, as you can see from the threads, actually bolts in to here on the caliper. It goes that way, so it actually, the threads are actually in here. So in theory you can actually take the front one off, lift it up, which is all you need to do to change the pads, but then you can slide the caliper off. But on this particular bike it doesn't quite work, because there isn't enough room with the hose here and this. So maybe if the wheel was out you could just lift it a little bit further, but as it is, that doesn't come out, so you do actually have to remove it. But in this case it needed to be removed, because that was just gummed in place really badly. So now it's just a question of going around and cleaning. Now here's the upper spring. No, it's got a small part here on the back for the single, and a sliding part here for the one that moves with the piston. Now you can get these out. This one seems quite fixed in there, so I'm not going to take it out. All I'm going to do is I'm going to get in there with a brake cleaner and a brush. A brass brush will clean these up really nicely. If you take them out you can get it better, but this is just a quick maintenance visit. It's not a complete overhaul of the caliper, although it's turning into that, to be honest. It will do if the piston is at all seized. Let's get in there, clean off any brake dust and just assorted road debris. Then we can look at the caliper. Now if I press the brake lever down here, then as I do that the pad will start to move out. piston will start to move out anyway, because we don't have a pad in there. And what I want to do is just to clean this up so that it can slide in and out easily. Again, the same thing. A little bit of brake in. I will often use hot soapy water for this, but as it's just a quick clean. If you've got some sort of coated piston, maybe you don't want to use a brass brush at all. But now what you should be able to do is to turn these round if you have the tool to do so, because all I've been able to do is clean this part of it. I can't get up in there and clean it. If I took the springs out, I'd get a little more room, but if I've got something like this, it just sits inside, doesn't do any damage to the piston, and I can move it round. Now what I've found in my experience is that sometimes you can't do it. It's too stiff, it won't move. If that's the case, your seals are bad. Basically there's corrosion probably inside the caliper, and the seals have been forced outwards and they're gripping the piston too tightly. If I can't turn it, that can't slide easily. So if that's the case, you're into full caliper rebuild most of the time. As you can see here, there's a bit of just a gummy build up. We want this nice and clean, because anything that's on the outside here is carried back inside every time they go back in. And we're looking for pitting. Just a little bit of pitting here. That's a warning sign that this piston is getting old. At some point in the not too distant future, it will need to be replaced. Get them nice and clean, and when we're done we can push them back in. Sometimes you can do it by hand, sometimes if your hands are strong enough they will actually go in with the pad. Sometimes you can do it with a clamp, a G clamp, something like that, but you can get these tools quite cheaply. Both of the tools I've just shown you are pretty cheap, they're nothing expensive. As I turn this, the fluid level is currently here and it's rising back up as the pad goes back, the piston goes back in. And now it's all the way at the upper mark, which is what happens as the piston goes in and out, and as your pads wear, this level will drop. It's a sure sign your pads are wearing is when your fluid level is dropping. So now the pad is fully back in. See what a nice little tool this is. I've had it for a while now, and it really does make this job so much easier. So there we go. So now we're pretty much ready to rebuild. So now to reassemble. On the pins I like to use anti-seize on the threads, and I like to use a bit of lithium grease on here. You could use rubber grease or whatever, because this is a part that goes into this slider. On this one I'm just going to use grease, because anti-seize, because what we've got here is we've got a metal pin inside the rubber, and we've got the same effectively on the other caliper. Also putting anti-seize on here where the piston pushes it. In theory it stops squeal, whether it does or not I don't know. I always do it. I don't get squeals, so maybe it does. And our other pin here, I've got some lithium grease on here. So just get this started. Right, so that's hand tight, and what we can see here is the sliding movement that the caliper makes on the pins, bringing that other pad into contact with the piston. Now, we saw how corroded that pin was. We also saw how much wear was on this pad compared to the other, and what that tells us is that only one pad was working. This was not sliding as it should have done, resulting in all the wear going on this pad, and this only working at 50% of capacity, which isn't good. I mean, you know, I know brake doesn't do an awful lot, but that's working at lower capacity than it should have done. So this is why we need to do this on a regular basis. Right, so next thing is to get the pads in. Now you can put the pads in before you bolt it in, but then you've sort of got to hold them in place while you're doing that. So I always find it's a bit catch-22. Now you have to press these down against the spring to line that up. And again, I want some anti-seize on here so we can get it back out again. Now you may also wish to get some anti-seize in the hole at the other end. There's very little chance of it migrating to the pads, but it does make sure that that pin will come out again when we need it to. And we'll torque these up when we've got them all in place. Now, pads need to be just lifted up so they sit in those clips at the back, and we can put the final pin in. And with all the pins in, we can torque it up. Now I'm going to get the torque wrench out in a minute, so I'm just going to nip them up for the moment. There, so that's all in place, and now you can see the caliper actually slides. Just before we finish on this, I realised that I omitted to show you this part. Now you can see that there's quite a lot of rust on this, and that's because this hasn't been lubricated. So I'm going to blow some of the rust out of there. I'm going to clean this up. You can see it's corroded, so that's not good, and probably should replace that at some point, but so long as the inside's okay, I'm not too worried. But I want to keep this properly lubricated, so we're going to clean that up and then put some grease in here to stop this re-rusting. Suzuki recommend a silicone grease for this. I don't have any, so I'm just going to use rubber grease. Now I've quickly cleaned this up on the wire wheel, but obviously where there's rust, that plating is no longer present. Again, if you've got a ability to replate, then that would be a perfect thing to do to this. Obviously you're not going to be able to do it in the same stuff they use because that's pretty hazardous. So I'm just going to use rubber grease instead. And I'm just going to try and pack plenty in there. Obviously don't get it over the brake disc or the pads. But make sure that is properly sealed into the groove there. Yeah. And that seems much happier than it was. Again, make sure those pads are seated up in that groove. If you leave excess grease around, it will also attract all the brake dust and everything else, so it's worthwhile keeping the outside clean. Grease is supposed to be on the inside, not on the outside. Right, and now we can torque these up. So this one's just 27 Newton meters. So you can see hardly anything at all. And the smaller pin is just 23. I'm also going to bleed the brakes, as I mentioned, I think, earlier on in the video. And again, nothing different to doing the rear brakes to the long detailed videos I've done on the front brakes. I'll link that if I remember when I'm editing. So let's get on with it. Since we're changing the fluid, let's get the side cover off. We're replacing .4 brake fluid, and that will mark your paintwork if it gets on there. So it's always a good idea to get anything you're worried about getting brake fluid on completely covered up. Make sure it's clean. You've taken the cover off. Get your JS screwdriver so you don't chop the threads. You want something to put the cap on, and particularly this inner cover. Now try and get that pushed back up in there because we're filling it fully. Those will need cleaning up a little bit. Get yourself an old a container for the brake fluid. You can see this is one that I opened in February and we're now in August, so that's dead. And remove as much of the brake fluid as you can out of here. And you can do it with cloths or paper or whatever. Might want to just mop up inside with some paper towels. Nothing that's going to leave any debris, especially if you've got any dirty bits at the bottom of the reservoir. Take your new bottle of brake fluid. I like to put just a couple of small holes in the top so that it only comes out at a very slow rate, and also mark the date I've opened it. And refill the reservoir. Don't forget to keep the reservoir topped up. If you allow air into the system, then you're going to have to pump that through as well. I think some of these air leaks are actually coming in from the tube. There, that made life better. The tube wasn't actually sealing properly. No, I'm pumping this straight through. I'm not opening and closing the bleeder. There's no need for it. I mean, I'd see if there's any air coming back this way. And that's about 4 reservoirs full. So I think that most of it is through. Seems a decent colour here. Lock that off. Top the reservoir back up. Tighten it up. Clean up anything that might have spilt. That's job done. I still need to replace the pads. Other than that, I just need to put the exhaust back on and we're done with the rear brake. Brake lever is now really nice and firm. Yeah, that's a great job. One last thing. If you have adjusted up your brakes, don't forget to check the rear brake switch and adjust as necessary in case it doesn't come on when you press the brakes anymore. You might need to just tweak the setting so that it does come on when you hit the brake. Right, and that's all there is to a brake overhaul on the 650 Bandit. Now, note this is the air-cooled 650 Bandit, and also note this is a late model 650 Bandit. I think 2005 onwards. The rear brake unit did actually change. Previous to that, you had a double piston unit, much like the front ones. I guess the move, I think, came with ABS, so I think they realised perhaps with the ABS that the dual piston on the back was too much rear brake and the ABS was kicking in too much when they tested it. That's only a guess. Anyway, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, particularly if this sort of thing is useful for you or you enjoy it, so that you keep up to date with anything further I do on the bike. There are a few more service jobs that I really should be doing on this bike, so I will be trying to get onto them over the coming months. So thanks very much for watching, and I will see you soon.